All right, so I would like to welcome Jack Wilson. So he's actually a professor in the Manning School of Business at UMass Lowell. He's also president emeritus of the UMass system and distinguished professor of higher education, emerging technologies, and innovation at UMass Lowell. He also is the founder of the Jack M. Wilson Center for Entrepreneurship within the Manning School of Business at UMass Lowell. And he is also a sponsor of the DifferenceMaker Idea Challenge, the Jack M. Wilson First to Market Award. And Jack has been very instrumental and helpful in launching and growing and helping to sustain the DifferenceMaker program to date. And some of you may recognize him from the Idea Challenge because he was an Idea Challenge finalist judge this year, as well as many Idea Challenges in the past. So with that, Jack, welcome. Thank you so much for being here and for your time this evening. And welcome.
Thanks so much, Holly. I appreciate that. And glad to be with the Difference Makers boot camp because this is really important in my opinion. I've loved the way Difference Makers got started. I've loved the way it's developed, and the most exciting part about it is I've often come to these Difference Maker programs and seen individuals that are very early in their career with a wonderful idea. And now, after a few years, I've seen some of you who've gone on to national fame and companies that have been successful. So that's kind of what it's all about. I mean, it's nice to be in at the early stage. It's great to have those ideas. But you can't know how exciting it is to those of us that get involved with this and help out with this to see some of you managing to go on and do these wonderful things. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of just a brief background about myself, if you will, to give you an idea of what shapes my viewpoints, but also to help bolster some of my, contentions about, excuse me, I'm trying to get this, there we go, about what financing and funding means for you. And over the years, I've dealt with, so many individuals, students, faculty, alumni. And one of the things that surprised me is that I found that for many of them, the financing and funding piece was the part that made them the most nervous. And, that they felt, kind of least prepared to be able to execute. So just wanted to talk a little bit about, funding and, it's such a big part of life, and a little bit about me. So I started as a research physicist. I went from there into modeling with high performance computing, became a consultant to some of the big computing companies on high performance computing, founded the Massachusetts Green High Performance Computing Company. I developed distant learning tools, and as you had heard, I became an administrator and eventually a president. I've got 50 years in now, sorry about that. Been around for a while. As a professor, department chair, research center director, dean, vice president, and president. So I've tried a lot of different jobs, and I like them all, and I like leaving them all as I went on to do other exciting things that like work with students in entrepreneurship. Before coming to UMass, I was at RPI, where I was the J. Eric Johnson Distinguished Professor of Physics, Engineering, Information Technology, and Management. Came to UMass. I'm a, you heard Distinguished Professor of Emerging Technologies, Higher Education, Innovation. And one of the things that wasn't mentioned yet was that along the way, I spun out of my research lab a company called iLink, the iLink LearnLink company. It had several different names along its history, iLink, LearnLink, and the last name that it had was Mentorgy when we did a triple reverse merger. It's a successful e-learning company, and when I left it, after I sold out my share, it was worth $500 million on NASDAQ in the year 2000. We closed the deal February 29, 2000. And if you're interested in kind of learning more about that, you can simply go to the links that I put into this talk. Now, Holly, you have provided this talk to all of the students, is that correct?
After this presentation, I'm going to email it all to them. Yep.
Excellent. Because throughout this talk, I will have links where I don't have time maybe to go into exactly how you get an SBIR grant to, to follow your work, but I have all the links there so that for those that are interested, they can follow on, and they can always contact me or others within the Wilson Center for Entrepreneurship to get additional help. So I just wanted to make sure they have the talk and that they have access to the link. So along the way, I did a lot of, I like to do new things. Definitely, I'm an innovator. I'm not the kind of a person that likes to run an organization for years and years and years. You can see that from my career. I like to jump into something. I like to get it started. Once it's started and once it's running and I feel that it's successful, I want to turn it over to somebody else and I want to go start another new thing. So I was the founding vice chair of the Massachusetts Life Science Center, working with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We've invested billions of dollars in life science startups, billions of dollars. I think it's about 3 now. I was a founding member of the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center, and that center, again, encouraged the development of clean energy in Massachusetts and has made us a leader in clean energy. I mentioned the Massachusetts Green High Performance Computing Center, which was a joint venture of UMass, MIT, Harvard, BU, Northeastern, EMC, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Talk about an unlikely group of partners. Whoever thought that UMass and Harvard and MIT and those others would partner up? But we did, because it made sense for all of us to do that. And we're much better off in our computing in the Northeastern United States because of that. I was also pulled in for the FBI, CIA, and Homeland Securities on cyber espionage and intellectual property issues because of the obvious issues around loss of intellectual property, cyber espionage, and so on. And I've spent a number of years working with them on those kinds of issues. And I got a tutorial in how very creative the cyber criminals really are out there. Pretty scary. And of course, here at UMass, we're experiencing a small little bit of that with the complete disruption of our computer system. And I guess it's not that small if you're in the middle of it and trying to fix it. Well, I did a lot of other kinds of things. You could see it on there. But the point is that these all kind of shape my view and so on. And I've been lucky in life. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of interesting people. I'm not a politician, but in the things that I did, I had to work with politicians. I like some of them. I don't like some of them. It's kind of irrelevant. I've had to figure out how to work with them, and kind of that's the way life is. I've mentioned that to my students. I've mentioned that to my children, that you don't always get to pick the individuals that you work with, but you have to be able to figure out how to do it. And so I was lucky, and glad I was lucky with that. But the luckiest I ever got was with two students. One of whom worked in my laboratory, the fellow on the left, Derhan Uslawel, the chief technology officer, and the other one who was getting an MBA at the time. Both of them at that time were getting their MBA, except Derhan was an undergraduate electrical engineer, so he was working for me really in electrical engineering. But he was in class with Mark, who was getting his MBA, and I was working on a research project in network communications, and it was funded by AT&T and IBM and other companies that, to investigate network communications, especially video on networks, audio on networks, and so on and so forth. And Derhan was probably the brightest student that I ever had. Well, I shouldn't say that. I had a lot of bright students. That's not fair. He was one of the brightest students that I've ever had. And Mark was a recovering entrepreneur. He'd gone out and he'd worked for Computer Associates first, a big company, and then he worked for CPR, a startup. So he had startup experience. Then he came back to get his MBA. And one day they walked into my office, and everybody was offering them jobs because they were so good and they were finishing their MBAs. And Darren looked at me and he said, "Dr. Wilson, I'm not going to go to work for one of those big companies that offered me jobs like IBM and AT&T and T and uh, just one right at Cisco and so on and so forth." He said, "I'm just not going to go work for them." I said, "How can you turn that down, Darren? They're offering you the world." And he said, "But I want to start my own company." And I thought, wow, that is so cool, Darren. You're going to start your own company. What kind of company is it going to be? He said, "I don't know, but you're going to be the president. And I think it has to do with the research that you're doing right now." So that's how I became an entrepreneur, right? A student made me an entrepreneur because I probably wouldn't have thought of it myself if he didn't just put me on the spot right at that moment. And I'm sure that some of you are going to do that to your professors too. You're going to teach them things that they never thought about before, and that's a great thing. So anyway, we went, and sure enough, we were quite successful. Here's a front page article, the second session, in the Wall Street Journal where they actually do articles about our software. It was in 1998, and the software screen is shown there and shown on the left, and you might notice that it kind of looks like the software that you use in a lot of distance learning. In many ways, I think it was better. For the graphics were not as good because the graphics in those days and the bandwidth was not as good, and the video quality was not as good as the video quality we're using now. But we already had all sorts of polling and chat functions and screen sharing and all of that. We had that in a prototype in my lab in 1993, and we had it in the workplace by 1995. And as you can see, the Wall Street Journal by 1998 saw us as the market leader. So this is just intended to show you what can happen when a student gets going, right? And it also shows that the student was intelligent enough to run out and get the resources that student needed to get this done. And one of the resources happened to be me, and so I was quite lucky to do that. This shows us in 2019. We've aged a little bit from the 90s when we first launched the company. But you see, with the four people sitting there, Mark Bernstein on the left became the chief marketing officer and led the marketing. Derhan was our chief technology officer. I was the president, and John Kolb is vice president of RPI, who was there to present the award. So that's really meant to be a case to say you can do it too. Okay, if they can do it, you can do it. And you've already met other people, other students that have done it, right here at UMass Lowell. But here's the key thing. Now we get to the core of our talk for today. No matter what I did in life, and you saw I did a lot of different things. Some people ask me, well, gee, why did you jump from job to job like that? And because I'm interested. I find something interesting. I'm like a migrant laborer, where the crops are ripe, I go and pick those crops. And then when they're picked, I head off for the next thing, whether it's high performance computing, network communication, and so on. But one thing was a constant in everything I did. I needed to beg for money. And some people describe university presidents as people who live in big houses and beg for money. It's not far off. The only problem at UMass is there's no big house, there's no small house, but I did beg for money, and you know that. Hundreds of millions, we raised hundreds of millions of dollars in donations every year, and a total budget of about $2 billion. So in that job, I had no choice. I had to focus on finding the resources to get it done. I was a scientific society CEO in Washington, D.C. We didn't mention that earlier, but I was. It's a nonprofit, and I had to go raise money to execute that mission, right? it's a mission of supporting the physics community in that particular case. I was a research center director and a professor. I had to raise millions in order to keep the research lab going, keep my students in scholarships, my faculty associates in jobs. I had to beg for money. When I was iLink founder and chair, I had to raise millions of dollars of capital, and we did raise some of those millions from Intel Corporation, was a multi-million-dollar investor, Exponential Investors out of upstate New York, Geo Capital Investors out of New York City, and others. And but I'm also going to note that we didn't raise the money right away. I'll come back to this later. We started by bootstrapping. And so I will want to say a little more about bootstrapping in a few minutes. The point that I'm making with this slide is it's pretty hard to see any leadership role where you don't have some responsibility for raising money. That said, the folks that I've worked with over the years, a lot of people don't like the role of asking for money, and some even find it embarrassing or beneath them. I don't know how many great ideas I've heard from nonprofit organizations coming right out of UMass Lowell students. And, but some of them say, well, I'm not interested in money. I want to feed the homeless. Okay. Or house the homeless and feed the hungry. You have a really great mission. Mother Teresa had a really great mission. And she had to raise billions of dollars to fund that mission. And by the way, I do a case study on Mother Teresa if you're interested. She was very good at it, and she did it. And as a result, she saved countless lives. So you're going to have to do some fundraising. Sorry about that. Next step is, how do you find it? Well, we all saw Shark Tank, right? So that's where a lot of people get their first kind of clues about, how do you to raise the money. Somebody comes in, they have this wonderful pitch, they make the pitch, they ask them to invest in the venture, they try to get them to believe it's a great opportunity. The climax comes when they ask the sharks to give me X million dollars for Y% of the company. And it kind of works that way in ventures, as you've no doubt learned in your boot camp, but it's not so fast and it's not so easy, and the decisions don't get made just like that the way they do on Shark Tank. And of course, on Shark Tank, they're usually a little lax in giving the financial details, and Mr. Wonderful jumps in, a Massachusetts guy, by the way, and used to see him downtown from time to time. And he pounces and tells them, your valuation is way too high, give me the data, and so on. So that's your challenge in the things that you're doing, the ideas you have. Where do you find the money? How much do you need? How much can you ask for? And what do you have to give? Unfortunately, it probably won't be as fast and easy as Shark Tank, but that's okay. For some of these slides, I put them in there, as I said, so that later you'll have them to work with. I won't go through every single detail on them. You always begin with how much money do you need? And usually the first two things on this slide, people get, no problem. They get the fact that there's capital requirements for facilities, equipment. They get that there's operating requirements. It takes a little pushing often to get the new entrepreneur to do the break-even analysis, to be able to tell you at what point in time will you begin to break even. Because if you can't show that, it's going to be very difficult to get anybody to invest in you. And the last one in particular, the overall attractiveness of the investment, that turns out to be the key to getting this done, and that's even harder to do. A lot of the rest of the talk will kind of focus on some of the places you can go to do this, but that's where you start with first. And yes, you have to learn a little financial jargon. And I have a little chapter on financial analysis, technological entrepreneurship, financial analysis. But if you want to do some of that and haven't done it already in your classes, you can do that. So those are the categories that you're looking at. I've already talked about the capital investments, but just to point out that frequently you have to go for a fairly long time without a product to sell. So you have no revenues coming in, and you have to figure out how in the world you're going to do that. The biotech startups are really tough for that. It's a long time and it's a lot of money. Computer software is a little easier and a little faster, so it varies. But all of those needs for cash lead to cash flow problems because you got to pay your employees and you have to pay your rent and you have to buy your materials regularly every week, month, and so on. And the orders get paid for in bunches much later, and frequently, long after you've had to pay your bills. So you're going to have to find some way to tide yourself over doing that. So where do you go? Here's the short list of places that you can go. And by the way, I mean, at this point, if anybody has a desire to ask a question, then please do, at any time, ask that question. I don't know how they've got this set up, whether you could just ask it verbally, I'm fine with that. If you just unmute yourself and say, hey, Dr. Wilson, what about this? I'm fine with that. If you want to launch it through a chat panel, and Holly will probably help me to watch for that so that she can make sure that I get any questions. Because I'll go lightly over each topic, but I'm always willing to give more information if a question comes forward. Sources of capital. The first four on this list are usually the early ones. That using your personal savings, maxing out your credit cards, and so on and so forth. The second one is friends and family, sometimes called friends, family, and other fools. And the last one is just added to tell you to be cautious. I'll say more about that later. But this is where a lot of startups really begin with personal savings and their friends and family. These days, one of the really cool things that has happened in the last decade has been the development of crowdfunding sites that did not exist in the past for entrepreneurs. I didn't have that when I did iLink, for instance. Would have been nice to have. And I'll give you a whole list of those in a moment. Bootstrapping, I'll talk a lot about that. That's when you figure out how to get some revenues in early enough so that you can, kind of get the business going on those revenues coming in. In my particular case with iLink, I sold vaporware. I said, hey, I'll send you software next year if you give me $300,000 today. It doesn't sound very persuasive. I don't know if any of you would give me $300,000 if I promised you software next year, but IBM did, AT&T did, GTE did, Sprint did, and a variety of others. News Corp did, so it can work. Once you get past those first four, and you become a little more established, then you can begin thinking about other sources like business angels. I'm going to go into each of these later. Venture capitalists, corporations, banks, the Small Business Administration loans, and government grants of I-Corps, SBIR, and STTR. So let me go ahead and continue to add to this list. This list, you should print it out and put it on your desk beside you, because this is a great first place for you to go for funding for your projects with the links. DifferenceMakers, all about, right? Then you get a little bit of initial funding for it. You're not going to get rich with DifferenceMakers. I don't know. Any of you get rich on different? Probably not. Holly smiled, but it helps you get started. We have another thing at UMass Lowell called the Riverhawk Venture Fund. That's for when you get more established. We can provide seed capital to Riverhawk Venture Fund folks. It could be a faculty member, I'll come back and talk more about this later, but faculty, staff, alumni. And those funds are in the order of $50,000 to $100,000 kinds of investments that we make. on the Riverhawk Venture Fund, but you have to be more established at that point. You really have to have, some there to be able to qualify that. Another step is the National Science Foundation I-Corps program, and I have two links there, one to the national program and the other one to our local program. We are a national I-Corps partner site. We have I-Corps funding, which we can give to spinoffs from UMass Lowell. And we do that regularly, and we've funded a number of programs already, and that's a place you can go. You have to, again, National Science Foundation, I-Corps, it has to be technology, and it has to be something that is a little more advanced. E4All is another local entrepreneurship for all. It started as the Merrimack Valley Sandbox, was funded by Desh Pandi, a local entrepreneur, and they have provided small grants to many of our student teams. So many DifferenceMaker folks have gone on to E4All. Similarly to VentureWell. VentureWell it's actually headquartered in Massachusetts, but it's a national organization headquartered out in Western Massachusetts that helps to administer the I-Corps national program and also provides grants. And we have had students that have won those grants. Mass Challenge is a Boston-based organization, and Mass Challenge provides much larger grants and accelerator support that they can put you in programs and training and so on and so forth. And we've had a number of our student grants, and I'm going to talk about some of those later, go into Mass Challenge. There's also Lowell Economic Development Funds. Holly and Steve Tello can kind of connect you to those when you get ready, and she'll know if you're ready or not for that. They don't fund the really early stage stuff, but if it looks like it might be important to Lowell, they will jump in, and they have funded several of our student projects. And another one that I put on here is the Mass Medical Device Development Center. It runs a pitch contest, and I put it in there. I happen to be wearing the logo of the Mass Medical Device Development Center because we use that to generate more spinoffs in medical devices in our region, mostly from UMass Lowell, but we also support mass medical devices that are medical devices that come out of other organizations in our region. So those are some of the sources of capital, all of which every one of these has had at least one organization that was, at least partly student generated. Okay. Just a couple of last comments about some of these things as you go in. Savings is obvious, right? The danger there is you put yourself too far in debt. You max out your credit cards, but it is what it is. As I said, friends, family, and other fools, when I founded iLink, my family wanted to invest in iLink. They were very excited about it, and they wanted to put a lot of money into it. I said no. Why did I say no? Because as an entrepreneur, I knew that I could fail. And if I failed, it was going to be tough on me. But if I lost my mother's money and my brother's and sister's money, I could lose a family too, And so that was a no. I said no to that. As it happened, we were very successful. So first of all, they were very angry when I wouldn't let them invest, even though I was trying to protect them. And then they were angry when we were usually successful because I hadn't let them invest. And so, but of course, they're family. So I donated some stock to each of them, and then they all felt better about that. But so friends and family is good. But just, think through what you're doing with friends and family, and, you recognize there's some issues. Bootstrapping, I talked about this. So how did we do that? We were written up in Success Magazine, and they laughed at us. They said, can you believe these guys? iLink is using the Wimpy model, named after Popeye the Sailor Man's friend, who was always coming by in the cartoons and saying, I'll gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. We said, we'll gladly give you software next year for $300,000 today. And sure enough, that list, IBM, Office Depot, News Corp, Sprint, Aetna, United Healthcare, and others did that. And so we got $300,000 contracts for them for future delivery of the software. We had a prototype that they were able to use and evaluate, and it's often called selling vaporware. So Success Magazine thought it was a really bad idea, but then they laughed like crazy, said, but it worked for iLink. So it can work, but it's something that you have to be careful of doing. We're not the only ones that use the wimpy method or the vaporware method or bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is not unusual. So we talked about the different ones. I just threw in some pictures. This was one of my favorite DifferenceMaker pitches of all time, not because it was a great product, because it was not a great product, I'm sorry to say. I'm not trying to insult anybody. But the team did about the best pitch I've ever seen for our product. It was a stick that you strapped to your back to improve your posture. And the judges, we were all sitting out there saying, well, I have no desire to invest in this, but I want to hire that team. And so it worked out well for the team. It just shows how important a really good pitch is. I mean, they got people's attention for selling a stick that you strap to your back to improve your posture. I don't think so, but hey, there it was. These are pictures of the Mass Medical Device Development Competition. This is a level up. Okay, this is a level up. These are serious pitches, and the people you see sitting at that table are all established figures in the medical device industry that are making the judgments. It's kind of like difference makers, but maybe raising the level in terms of the folks that are there, and by the way, in terms of the money that could, because if you get something really good, you're not only going to get the money from the mass medical device, winning it, but one of those individuals in the audience that might be working for Boston Scientific or one of the major medical companies might make a multi-million-dollar investment. And yes, that has happened. So that's another place, depending on what you do, that you can go to. This is the kind of founding group for the Riverhawk New Venture Funding. And this group is made up of UMass alums who have been very, very successful. And they have donated money to UMass to invest in new startups, but they get nothing out of it other than the pleasure of giving that money to great entrepreneurs. They don't through this part of it, take a position in the company. Instead, if the company is successful and we get stock in the company from the venture, the funding that we make, if that company is successful, then UMass Lowell benefits, and we put that money back into scholarships, which some of you may have, for all I know. So these are really cool people. These are very cool people, and I just saw Brian Riss there. He's not in this picture, but he's on this group of really cool people who've given so much to UMass, and this is just something extra they do, right, to kind of help out. But boy, we've had some great programs go through there. Oh, I saw Ray, I think, from Invisaware before he jumped off, and that we invested in his organization as well. So those are some of the investments. E4All, the links are there for that. Smaller amounts of money, but it's often, E4All is often kind of like a trampoline that you jump on for a little bit of money, and then you jump up to get something more like $100,000 in the global competition that they're talking about here. So another good place to go for money. Mass Challenge was mentioned. The picture at the left shows a UMass Lowell triple alum. All she's got her bachelor's, master's, and her doctoral degree from UMass, but that wasn't enough for her. She managed to also get a master's degree from Harvard and a master's degree from MIT, just to make sure that she's the shorter of the two that you see there, Manisha Nazari Goldberg, and they won one of the Mass Challenge grants that and has been very successful. She also won the MIT, 100K challenge as well. Again, UMass Lowell student graduate in this case, makes good. The MIT 100K competition, that's the granddaddy of them all. It's been around for a long time as a pitch contest, and they continue, and some of our students, as I mentioned, have been successful with that. So this slide talks about bootstrapping methods. They're pretty obvious, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. You're welcome to read through that if you do it. The crowdfunding business, as I said, huge, great place for you to go. That's nice for early stage. What is the limitation on that? The limitation is you can't actually sell stock, right? So you have to be selling product or an idea. It was really, Kickstarter was begun to fund creative ventures, right? GoFundMe for personal hard times, Indiegogo, idea, charity, startup business. They charge a fee, but they can't sell stock. So it's a place to get some amount of funding, and lots of UMass Lowell organizations have done that, including Invisaware that I mentioned earlier. But it's only a good place to start. And I gave you some links so that you can go find a whole list of great places to find crowdfunding and what they fund and what they don't fund in Investopedia. There's a variety of places you can Google to go there, but this was a fairly good one. Okay. Once you become more established, things get much more complicated. Once iLink got to be, we were running about $3 million a year, and unfortunately, the $3 million a year in revenues would come in big chunks. And our salaries for our employees had to go out bi-weekly, right? So if you're waiting for the big chunk, you might not be able to pay that. It got pretty rough, and eventually we realized we had to go one of these two ways, either by borrowing money or by selling equity. And then there's a combination, convertible debt, which we often use in the Riverhawk Venture Fund, which is a debt which can be converted into equity. Too deep to go into here, but again, I have links. You can, jump in and look at this. But making the decision between taking on debt to fund your venture and equity is an important one. The beauty of debt is that you don't give up any of your company. The ugliness of debt is that you're on the hook for that debt, and usually they will not give you a loan without you signing for it personally. So I'll tell a story about Mitt Romney in a few minutes, and we'll see that can be an issue. Equity, on the other hand, is they take the risk along with you. Developing the pitch, that's what DifferenceMaker asks you to do. You know all about the elevator pitch. Everybody has a different version. DifferenceMaker's, I think, is 3 minutes, right, Holly? You call it the rocket pitch, and it's a great one.
Yeah, it started as 3, and then all the judges wanted 5, so now it's 5 minutes.
Oh, now it's 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
So remember that the pitches to investors and not customers, it always ends with an ask. And remember also that the actual time varies, and the investors are the ones who determine what the actual time should be. That's, we've had, some teams say, oh, I thought it was only supposed to be, 1 minute. Or I need 5 minutes, and the investors say 3. Remember, it's the investors who set the rule. Angel investors or private investors using their own funds, they oftentimes help you. Venture capital or pooled funds, they're more difficult. Investors are always looking for a way to get their money back, an exit strategy. They're looking for a great venture team with motivation, an excellent business opportunity. I'm going to let these things go. Here's details of venture capital you don't need to know now, but I have put it in here for completeness. I jump now to that story. When I became the president of the University of Massachusetts, it happened kind of, I wasn't trying to be a president. In fact, I was trying to avoid being a president because I had other things I wanted to do. And there was a difficult circumstance that happened in Massachusetts about that time. The previous president had to resign. I was asked to step in an emergency. I said I would do it. Governor Romney called me over to his office to talk. We set up a really good initial working relationship. Of course, he loved the fact that I was an entrepreneur and been through venture capital and done all that kind of stuff. And near the end of the meeting, he said, "Jack, this is a very high stress job. Do you think you're up to enduring that kind of stress?" And I said, "Well, Governor, I was the CEO of iLink in the early years and bootstrapping the company. And remember what I said about taking on debt? We took on debt. I needed to borrow money to pay the employees while I was waiting for some of those checks to come in from IBM and AT&T and all those companies that promised money. So I did personally sign for those loans. I had millions of dollars of loans that I personally signed for. And, if those companies didn't send me the check, my kids weren't going to college." And it could get pretty rough. I have to confess, I don't think I fully filled my wife and 4 children in on some of the ramifications if this did not work out for us. They had some idea. I said, "Governor, running UMass is not stress. That is stress." He laughed because he knew what it meant. Why am I telling you that story? Because it is stressful to do this, and you need to understand, that you're going to have to kind of balance all of these kinds of issues when you go forward on that. So the next set is really an appendix to tell you where you can go to get government grants and loans. I had SBIRs, I had SBA. So the information is here for you to do that, but not that it's too deep for me to go into right now, and how you do the IPO. I wanted to end just by looping back now. I mentioned Invisaware before. I have a whole case here. The link is here so you can have a look. If any of the Invisaware founders are still on here, Ray or Risa, I would always love it when they comment and fix anything that I have wrong. But there was an example that I first saw in an engineering prototyping contest that I left out even before DifferenceMaker. And we all sat there, and Ray and Risa made their presentation, and we had a bunch of industry figures, pretty prominent people, and they're all sitting there, mouth wide open, saying, "Wow, this is something." And sure enough, it was something. And the story because you've heard it already about the walking home to her car and feeling unsafe, but not wanting to wear some big clunky thing where you press a button. She wanted something that she could kind of hide and put in her purse, and and it would notify the folks. So it was a panic button, but you could make a list on your phone of who you would notify. You didn't have to pull the phone out because in an emergency, if you pull the phone out, your assailant uniformly grabs the phone out of your hand. So by squeezing the jewelry, you can get your help without kind of alerting your assailant to the fact that you just called for help, which was just when they hit the big time. By saving that woman's life when she was at a serious accident, was not able to be seen, was able to alert folks who came and saved her life because she was off the road and in an inaccessible place that couldn't be seen from the road. So, you know what they can do, the emergency alert. I've already gone through that. Just kind of sum it up with this final thing that pulls together everything we said. Like many of you, they met in their classes. Like many of you, they had a good idea. They decided to enter the prototyping competition, the DifferenceMaker. They went on to get the most innovative solution. They were invited to join Mass Challenge, which they were one of the winners there. Only 128 accepted out of 1,700 companies. They also did crowdfunding. They did an Indiegogo. They earned $15,000 in prizes. They raised $100,000 in funding once they were more established. They got their first loan. You notice how they kind of hit every point that I just made. They got a loan of $1 million from the Lowell Development and Finance Corporation that I mentioned. You could, talk to Holly or Steve Tello about. A company, Arrow Electronics, made an investment. The first round eventually raised $500,000. By 2008, they were selling device. And last December, ADT, I think it's the world's largest security company, made an investment in a joint venture with Invisaware. Wow. Have a look at that, folks. That's what it's all about, right? They're not the only ones to do this. Just happens to be a recent one, and it's a great story. It shows what you can accomplish if you put your mind to it. It's not easy. I tried to show that. There's lots of stress around it. I tried to show that. You have to get over your embarrassment of asking people for money. I tried to show you that. But guess what? If you pull it off, you could end up with a happy ending. You might not get a trophy. This was a very happy ending for those of us that are Red Sox fans that are a little older, that suffered through years of Red Sox futility, and they finally won the World Series after 86 years of failing. That's kind of the way you feel. And I'm sure that's kind of the way the Invisaware founders feel. When you get your funding, you feel like you won the trophy, you won the World Series. So, folks, that basically is it. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to take those questions.
Thank you so much, Jack. That was really, really nice how everything kind of tied in together and showing Invisaware and how they actually touched upon and pursued all those different points you made. I think that was really nice and beneficial and really easy to understand. So thank you so much.
I'm delighted to do it. I was just trying to, kind of hit on the main points that I would hope would resonate with, with the folks in DifferenceMaker Bootcamp.
All right, students, any questions or comments?
I could go first, Holly.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the presentation. It's very informative to me, actually. And I'm very interested in the way we can we approach a funder or donor. Like, could you explain more how we can, approach for funding? For example, do we need to develop a proposal? What kind of proposal that we can, send it to different donor? What are the requirement, or maybe something that we can start with? Maybe more information would be very helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and I kind of skipped over that part. If you take any of the classes in our entrepreneurship program, we go through great detail of that, and DifferenceMaker works on that too. Yes, you have to have some kind of a proposal, and there are alternate forms for that. The traditional kind of a proposal, which is still out there in the world, is called a business plan, right? And there's a variety of forms of business plan, but they're still out there. The NSF, through the I-Corps program, instituted something called the Lean Launchpad, which I think DifferenceMaker teaches. Do you teach the Lean Launchpad, Holly, in the DifferenceMaker program?
Pieces of it here and there, but we don't go really into
the details. Well, the Lean Launchpad was developed by a guy from Stanford named Steve Blank, who said business plans are old, they're all junk, nobody follows a business plan anymore. And so we're going to do something, a business model canvas, and a much briefer thing, doing customer discovery, and it's very good. There's no doubt it's very, very good. But remember what some people call the golden rule. those who have the gold rule. And so if you're asking people for money and you go and tell them, oh, I did a lean launch pad, and they say, I want a business plan, I would suggest you do a business plan. And we had that happen because we did, have some of our folks going to the Riverhawk Venture Fund. They were doing the lean launchpad model, which is a good model. It's great. And it doesn't take much to turn that into a business plan. We teach people how to do that. But some of the big investors that were sitting there said, well, that's great. We love your lean launchpad. Now, let me see your business plan. And so having that, the pitch is absolutely the critical thing. And in general, I suggest that people make 12 slides and never use 12 slides, right? The DifferenceMakers is a little different. They have the specific set of slides. That's fine. I mean, there's just different formats to do it. Why do I have you make 12 slides? Because then you have a library depending upon what people want to hear. So if they want to hear about the team, you got a slide for that. You want to hear about the technology behind the product, you got a slide for that. They want to hear about, and so for each pitch, you could kind of pick and choose, but you're probably only going to use 3 or 4 slides. You're never going to use 12. Maybe you only use 1. I've seen good pitches with 1. I've seen actually some good pitches with none, although I suggest that a couple of slides are very, very helpful. So yes, that is how you do it. And then, of course, the reason that I gave you all those links was so that you would know where you could then take that plan and what they're going to be looking for in that plan. And of course, we also have mentoring within the center, so that it's possible to contact folks in the DifferenceMaker can help you connect into that. Folks in the Center for Entrepreneurship and the Department of Entrepreneurship and Innovation can help you connect into that. We just have a variety of places, and I hope one thing you picked up from my thing is we are delighted to try to help make people successful. And when they are successful, we're overjoyed. And a little bit, we feel like proud parents. We know they did all the work, but okay, we helped out along the way. That's what makes it worthwhile. That's why people keep coming back. All those people you saw around the table, donating money to these projects, that's why they come back all the time. So was that helpful on specifically where to go? If I know more about your project, then I'd be able to tell you exactly where you might take it from there.
Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome. That's all.
All right, thank you. Other questions or comments? Jack, I have a question. As an entrepreneur and sort of going through that process, I know you talked about some of the difficulties with the stress. So do you have any advice? Because I know a lot of these students, they're working or they're going to be commuting to campus and they're graduating and getting job offers. So do you have any advice for students who are sort of maybe struggling with how to cope with that stress or sort of how to move forward with their idea?
Yeah, I could base that upon some research that was done in entrepreneurship, in a variety of places called effectual entrepreneurship. And they have a principle called affordable risk, right? And so the advice, to folks in that thing is to try to keep your risk affordable, right? Try to have a pretty good probability. People tend to say entrepreneurs are risk takers. Research shows that they're risk takers, but they're not gamblers. They are calculated risk takers. They think that they have the odds on their side. They're like the folks at MIT that beat the blackjack tables all around the country. They figured out statistically how to do that, and it changed the way casinos play blackjack to this day because they could tilt the odds in their favor. That's the way entrepreneurs are. I mean, I felt when I started this, the odds were tilted in my favor. I knew the people that owed me the checks, from IBM and AT&T and so on. I knew they were hungry for the software. It was an affordable risk for me. I was lucky. All the checks came in. and I paid off all the loans. But then I realized, okay, I can't keep doing this. And so my affordable risk at that point, because we'd grown to where the numbers were no longer affordable for me, was I went out and got venture capital. Because venture capital, their capital's at risk then, not mine. And so you're going to balance that. Also, just stage of life kind of a thing. My own son got his undergraduate and graduate degrees in engineering, biomedical engineering undergraduate, mechanical engineering graduate. Did a lot of internships along the way in these really big research organizations and big companies and everything. He said, I think I want to be an entrepreneur. I said, okay, John, your summer internship this summer should be in a startup. And so he went out and worked with a startup, as a matter of fact, a medical device startup, spun out of some Boston hospitals. So find out what it's like. And my other piece of advice for him was, go get a job at a regular. This is different than Derhan. Derhan knew what he wanted to do, right? And so I wasn't going to stand in his way. But if you're not sure and you want to keep the affordable risk down, go to work in a big company, build your network, do your planning, because that experience and that network will help you be an entrepreneur later, which is what he's doing. He's an engineer for Apple Computer right now. He's responsible for bringing up the iPhone production lines each year for the new iPhone. So, what that has to do with biomedical engineering, I have no idea, but he does it, and I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes an entrepreneur one day, but for now, he works for a big company. So that's the other piece of affordable risk. You can, time this to be right for you. For Derhan, it was right that he start right away. For other people, maybe you should go out and work for a while. Is that helpful at all, Holly?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. Thank you. Good advice.
I just have one really quick question. So we currently have a few options, but we have limited time. We can either go for options that have the possibility of really high payout, but there's much more competition, or some more smaller opportunities, but we might have a better chance. So which would you suggest we really invest our time in?
Well, that is very, very hard without knowing the details of it. That we go right back to what I said about research on entrepreneurs. They take calculated risk. So in your particular case, you would look at, how high the risks were for the high reward option. And if you can assure yourself that those risks, there's risk, obviously you're going to go for high reward, you're going to have high risk. But if you can kind of convince yourself that the odds are on your side to go for the high risk option, then why not go for the brass ring? Also, you ask yourself, I'm young, if I totally fail at this, I'll go get a job with Apple Computer or wherever, I just made that one up. So that's another way to mitigate your risk, but only you can make that calculation. And the details about how much competition there is, and I don't know enough about your project to know whether or not it's worth taking that, and if it's affordable to you. If you could say, hey, I'm going to spend the next 3 years going for the brass ring, but if not, there's plenty of other jobs, good jobs out there for me, and I'm fine with that. And that's what Derhan and Mark did. It was tough for them. They both got married, just as we started the company. Their wives wanted to have new cars. They wanted to start a family. And they kept saying, no new cars, no family. When we sold the company, they had new cars, in 2000, they had new cars, and they each had 2 children within 2 years. So these are all part of the calculation that you put in. They made their calculation. They did what they needed to do. It turned out okay for them. But they made some sacrifices along the way. They drove some junkers for a few years. You're
Okay, thank you.
welcome.
Awesome. Super helpful. Really great advice, Jack. We're at time. I know a couple students messaged me saying that they have some other meetings that they have to get to. So if there are other questions, feel free to email me. I can get you in contact with Jack. He can answer those questions for you. And again, Jack, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I know how busy of a person you are. So this is just really appreciated, all your support of DifferenceMaker and the students. So thank you, Jack.
Well, thank you, Holly. You do all this work, and I appreciate it.
Well, I couldn't do it I couldn't do it without the support of people like you. So really appreciate it.
Good luck to everybody. Call on me if I can be helpful. Just good luck, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.